Ladies and gentlemen, we have a new mayor. I met yesterday afternoon with Mayor-elect Faulconer, and I'm confident that we will have a seamless transition between our two administrations. My staff and I will make sure that he and his staff have all the information they need to hit the ground running and to continue to provide great service to the people of this wonderful city. I want to take the opportunity this morning to provide some updates on some of the longer-standing items on my to-do list as we near the end of my time as mayor. When I came into office, one of the first decisions I had to make to clean up City Hall was to direct staff to apply our rules and regulations fairly and consistently. Sadly, because of the state of affairs of the previous administration and the favors he chose to do for some and not for others, this was seen as something of a drastic change. As I said at the time, we will begin following the law, and if we don't like the law, we'll change it, but we will not be ignoring it. Out of that direction, it was clear that there was a need for some clearer rules of the road for medical marijuana dispensaries, food trucks, and remodels. So let me hit those three items for you this morning. First, let's talk about food trucks. Food trucks help add character to San Diego's neighborhoods and creating sensible and fair rules help ensure their impacts are only positive. The regulations being proposed were developed with extensive input from food truck operators, customers, neighbors, and restaurants, and I hope that they'll be approved by the City Council when we consider them on March 3rd. The proposed ordinance provides that private property owners who host food trucks must apply for an over-the-counter permit from our Development Services Department. Please note that food truck operators are not required to get permits. Please also note that no permit would be required for property owners in industrial areas where food trucks are providing a private catered service, or at schools, hospitals, religious facilities, or construction sites. In residential areas, there is a proposed limitation on hours of operations in order to reduce the potential for late-night noise impacts on residents. It's pretty sensible, right? The proposed hours of limitations are within 500 feet of a dwelling unit from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Sunday through Thursday, and 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. on Fridays and Saturdays. Also fairly sensible. It's important to clarify that this does not mean that food trucks cannot operate within 500 feet of a residence. It only puts a very sensible time limitation on those operations. There's also been some misconceptions circulated online and in a couple of news reports and on some websites that I'd like to take a moment to try and correct. I've heard people say that this proposal will limit food trucks from parking within 500 feet of restaurants. The truth is that there is no 500-foot separation distance that would be required from restaurants, nor is there any limitation in the ordinance that would require a specific separation distance from mobile food trucks and restaurants. I've heard that we're banning food trucks in neighborhoods like Gaslamp, Little Italy, and many of our beach communities, La Jolla, and around San Diego's universities. There is no ban on mobile food trucks included in this proposed ordinance. Instead, the city has identified appropriate zones and locations to allow mobile food trucks by right, and locations where food trucks need minimal staff review in order to limit the time, place, and manner of operations so that we can minimize potential conflicts, particularly between pedestrians and vehicles. All the limitations are intended to protect public health and safety. The Gaslamp Quarter and Little Italy are special character locations with significant historical, cultural resources and extremely high levels of pedestrians and vehicular activities where food trucks would be allowed only as a part of a special event in order to allow for appropriate planning and consideration so we can minimize their potential impacts. In locations mapped as high parking demand with limited on-street parking availability, food trucks would be limited to operating on private property in order to preserve the very limited, much-needed on-street parking for customers. I've also heard that the proposed ordinance is somehow anti-competitive or discriminatory and enforces rules on food trucks that do not apply to other businesses in adjacent areas. I'd also like to correct that. The intent of the ordinance is a fair approach to protect public health, safety, and welfare, and while providing food truck operators on private property and in public rights of way. No permit or limitations would apply to food truck operations in industrial zones or on property of schools, universities, hospitals, and religious facilities, and they can continue to serve as construction sites or provide for private catering. Commercial properties are locations with high levels of vehicle and pedestrian traffic where minimal staff review of proposed development is desirable to minimize potential conflicts. The proposed mobile food truck permit review in commercial zone is similar to the level of permit review required for any other change out of commercial tenants on a private property. The proposal is less stringent on food truck operators than on other businesses by allowing for a single permit to cover all prospective food truck operations on a given property with no limit on the number of food truck operators per permit. I hope that that is helpful, and I'd appreciate your help in spreading the word on this proposed ordinance. Now let's talk about medical marijuana. We have some proposed regulations. The ordinance is expected to go before the City Council on February 25th. The main components of that ordinance are as follows. Cooperatives must be separated from public parks, churches, child care centers, playgrounds, residential care facilities, schools, and other cooperatives by a distance of 1,000 feet. Cooperatives must apply for a conditional use permit with a 5-year expiration. No on-site medical professionals will be allowed, and the ordinance includes a 100-foot buffer from residential zones. The San Diego Planning Commission voted in favor of moving this ordinance to the City Council, with one vote against by a commissioner who thought that the ordinance was too restrictive. We can talk about some of the peculiarities around taxation, number of dispensaries, and enforcement, but just like food trucks, I'm confident by providing fair and clear rules of the road, San Diego will be far better off. Lastly, on previously conforming, I want to give an update on what we call the previously conforming ordinance. This is the language that we have in our code that allowed for Jack in the Box to legally remodel its locations, even though community plans didn't allow for it. This was literally the first thing I had to handle when I took over at 5 p.m. on August 30th when my predecessor left office. Our staff who focus on the land development code, these wonderful public servants who actually are also the same people working on the medical marijuana ordinance and the food truck ordinance, continue to try and clarify the code language so our neighborhoods can be better protected in the future. It's still my hope that we'll have a proposed new language to consider very, very soon, and I look forward to working on that when I return to my role as the council president. So those are the items I wanted to give you updates on today. And of course, as always, I'm happy to take questions on any topic that you like. The floor is yours, guys. Gene.
You want to discuss those peculiarities on the marijuana collectives, enforcement, taxation, and introduce a permit process as well? Fee, enforcement fee, things like that?
Sure. So about taxation, our city attorney has opined that the city has broad authority to tax cooperatives, but of course that would require a vote of the people. So that will be left probably for another occasion. The number of dispensaries, we have heard some concerns, well, depending on where you stand on this issue, about the number of dispensaries that are allowed. If you look at the sort of raw land use planning, you know, you could have larger numbers in certain parts of town. It makes sense since this will be largely in industrial zones. The practical matter, I think at the end of the day, my staff is telling me that we'll have about 30 dispensaries in the city. It could be more, I mean, it could be less, depending on sensitive receptors and the proximity to one another, but that's essentially what you're dealing with. And then with regard to enforcement, the permits will be issued by the Development Services Department. And I think some of you have written or asked about in the past where we kind of stand with regard to dispensaries today. Of course, as of today, no dispensary is operating legally in the city of San Diego, although we have some that are currently operating. The last numbers I had is that between August 30th and now, the city has received 34 complaints about dispensaries. 15 of those 34 have closed, and 13 other dispensaries reported prior to August 30th have also closed. So that's kind of the state of affairs at the moment.
So 6 are still outstanding?
That's my math too, yeah.
Okay.
That we're aware of.
The amount of the permit fee, is that based on?
I don't have that number just yet. We're wanting to make sure that it's fully cost recoverable. Clearly, the city shouldn't have to, the city general fund shouldn't have to bear any of this expense. And naturally, this is sort of a new area for us, so we're still working on that. But it's our expectation that this will be fully cost recoverable.
Requirement for on-site security, weapons, no weapons, what's your?
Yeah, so that actually ordinance still stands. Some of you may remember the tortured history around this issue, where the council adopted a series of both of a land use ordinance and a public safety ordinance back in 2011. The land use ordinance was the one that was challenged by, interestingly, advocates of compassionate use. So the land use ordinance was the one that was rescinded. The public safety ordinance still exists, and that one does speak to the issues of hours of operation, security, cameras, things of that nature, signage. This solely will describe addresses where they may go in the city.
So are those 6 operating illegally then?
Yeah.
I don't recall this business about no medical professional allowed on site. I don't remember anything like that. What's that about?
I believe that's about making sure that this, or to try and make it more likely that these are medical recommendations for legitimate conditions. And so I think,
So it's not a one-stop shop where you can go in and get your recommendation.
and that's why you are so smart. Yes, exactly right. Yeah.
And Dayquil's really
Yeah, it really is.
Has there been,
Craig.
in your dealings with medical marijuana
Mhm.
advocates, has there been a feeling that they're willing to work with this ordinance? Because it's actually less restrictive than, or more restrictive than the one in 2011.
It is that, yeah.
I mean, are you getting a sense from them that they just want some rules in place rather than having nothing at the moment?
We've had some discussions with advocates, and I think that they're more cognizant of reality than they were perhaps in 2011. We have a council that rejected a more a looser ordinance last year that was proposed by the previous mayor. This is what is possible, and for folks like myself who are believers in compassionate use, I think what we have to do is create a circumstance where these are operating legitimately and legally within the community and are shown to not be negative contributors to the neighborhood environment. I believe that's possible with the combination of zoning and the public safety ordinance. We can create a circumstance where these are not negative attractors. There certainly is a perception. I don't think it's always reflective of reality, but there's a perception out there that these are not good things for the neighborhoods. If we can create a circumstance where we weed out the bad actors, that we oh, I'm sorry, that was completely unintentional, but that may have been the Dayquil. Where we remove those who are not good actors. We want to have the good businesses, the folks who will follow codes of conduct, operate legitimately. I think that we maybe have an opportunity to come back in the future and talk about perhaps expanding it. But for right now, we need to get some rules of the road on the ground. It's been far too long since the voters approved compassionate use in this state. We have not done enough to date. It's not for want of trying. Obviously, many have tried but haven't been successful yet. We need to get some rules of the road on the table. And I think, as we look to other jurisdictions where additional steps are being taken, it'd be wise for the city to have some rules on the books sooner rather than later.
So are they all in District 8?
No. We have two very large industrial zones in the city, Otay Mesa and Kearney Mesa. And so because this ordinance does sort of funnel them into those areas, you will have, at least under the sort of general look, that's where you may have, but there are some in almost every council district. And ultimately, again, we are just best guesses. We look at the sort of land use maps on their own, whether or not there's a daycare facility near a piece of land that may be allow under the zoning. We don't necessarily know that. But again, this is a way to get this underway, to try and keep faith with what the voters approved many years ago, allow for the legitimate use by people who need this. I think, again, the hope would be that in the future we can do this in a different way.
Can you clarify the status of those 6 that are operating illegally with regard to an enforcement posture? That's something to be left to Uncle Sam, or is there something that you can't talk about because of police proprietary planning now?
All of that, I don't. We respond on a complaint basis, and ones that we have complaints on, we respond to. That's a part of following the law. Meanwhile, trying to change this, they're not operating legally. No collective has ever operated legally in the city. That was true when we had almost 200. It was true when we had about 30 or something a few months ago, or whatever we may have today. What I'm aiming to do, though, is create a situation where they can't operate legally in the city, in select locations.
On food trucks,
Mm-hmm.
Are there neighborhoods that you can tell us about where residents complain? Do you have examples of neighborhoods where I'm curious about the residential restrictions and how those came about.
Well, I think you're talking about deeply residential areas, and I'm not aware of those, like Claremont or Rancho Bernardo or something like that. I have heard complaints from constituents, particularly in the downtown areas where these operate. They do attract a lot of folks, and so. But I think what we're talking about more is the sort of classic, maybe suburban or bedroom community area where it wouldn't be appropriate to operate.
I'm thinking of something like where there's like South Park.
Okay.
Where food truck will park out in front of the whistle stop,
Mm-hmm.
and that's pretty close to residents.
It is that.
So you would have in that situation on a Friday night, they'd be allowed to be there till 11 o'clock.
Till 11 p.m.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, so but the question was about neighborhoods where where there were groups of residents that complained? Is that, so are you saying downtown is kind of where that?
I was just responding to what complaints I personally have been brought to me by a constituent, those have largely been in downtown, mostly because there have been special events where you have clusters of them. It's just brought an enormous amount of people, and we need to have some way to kind of work with that and plan with that, work with city staff, police, whatever, to make that work a bit better. To your question, yeah, I mean, if this was within 500 feet of a dwelling unit, they would have that time limited restrictions. Certainly, through the better part of my council district where we have mixed use, this would be an issue. But again, you can. I think that those hours are probably pretty reasonable, and we can also go on private property and operate there as well.
And I can get to see if there are any complaints that we've gotten. I don't remember getting any in a residential area, but I can get that.
I got a complaint.
You got a complaint?
A question.
I'm customer service department for the city. How can I help you?
You mentioned that the people that hire or get food truck into their, for a party or something,
Yeah.
they have to get a permit.
Mm-hmm.
Is that expensive?
No,
Because,
no.
like,
They wouldn't.
No, we had a catering, a food truck vendor coming to one of our meetings in the
Mhm.
station, and then we put them inside the parking lot. Still, we do need to have a
No.
permit for that?
No. You tell me you're breaking the law, Carlos, though?
No, that's what I wanted to be
I'm going to
sure.
call
I
code
wanna-
compliance right now.
More important, high parties.
And what was my invitation to your party? No, I'll just repeat again. No permits would be required for private property owners in industrial areas who are providing private catering services. And I think for this particular case, Katie, do you want to? It's a private party. It's off. It's on.
It sounds like it falls into that, but we can clarify.
Yeah, because we're not that, we cannot hire an expensive catering. We gotta get one of those food trucks.
What? Well, and mind you, the permit.
Well, they get into our parking lot. It's not on the street, like something like that.
Yeah, and the permits we're talking about here are over the counter. They're very low cost, and they'll be relatively easy to provide. It's simply a matter of checking to make sure that we're in compliance, that the traffic patterns or whatever are fine. I think if you're going to be off the street, you're going to be largely good to go. And again, it's the property owner that applies for it, not the food truck operator.
All right. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, in this case, it's not in our budget to pay for the fees.
Yeah. That Univision money, I'm sure you can afford this permit. You're like the #1 station.
Todd, you talked about moving forward with Kevin, and seeing
Yeah.
problems, but are there some issues on the table that you want to make sure you've taken care of before he takes over? Are there some projects that you really want to make sure get done in the next couple of weeks?
We've covered a lot of ground in the 6 months that I've been here. In terms of remaining items, the things I've laid out today are ordinances that I'd like to get done before I return to the council presidency. And I think based on the timelines, at least food truck and medical marijuana are ones we can do. Previously conforming is taking a little bit longer time, but I don't think substantially longer. I don't actually have a concern about a Faulkner administration not moving forward with these. These are sensible. I think there's stuff that he can support, or actually in some cases have support in the past. In terms of things that are left to be done, my focus right now is on our homeless services initiative. I really believe strongly that we can take the money that we're currently spending and spend it in more strategic ways that have better outcomes. Both Councilmember Faulkner, or Mayor-elect Faulkner, and Councilmember Alvarez are supportive of this approach. So I think that will also get done, but that won't really be done until we adopt the new fiscal year budget. But this is something we're spending a lot of time on because we got to do better than what we're doing now, and I think we can.
Do you have concerns about some of the other things you laid out in the state of the city that Mayor-elect Faulkner might not move forward on?
Well, it's a great question, and that was a part of why I chose to endorse Councilmember Alvarez, was that in making that speech, I knew that David agreed with every one of the points that I laid out. I think going forward, we're going to have to work very closely with Mayor-elect Faulkner to make sure that we don't lose ground on our climate action plan, which we should adopt. We have to be aggressive on neighborhood infrastructure, and I think that is something the voters should be allowed to determine in 2016. I think additionally, we have a real problem when it comes to inequality in the city and the widening gulf between the very rich and the very poor. And I think the best way we can address that is by raising the minimum wage locally. I know that during the campaign he expressed opposition opposition to that. And that's okay. We'll talk some more about it. We have a number of months to do that. I'd love to convince them. I may not be successful in that, but ultimately that's also a decision I'd like to give to the voters to weigh in on. But I think that no matter your political party or your political point of view, I think everyone can agree that if you work full time, you shouldn't live in poverty. And that means that we need to take action on this issue, and I'm aiming to do that.
Should it be a foregone conclusion, or is it an open question as to whether a Democrat will be appointed to fill the vacancy in Council District 2?
Gene. No, and actually, I need your help with this. I want anyone who is able to serve and qualified to serve to put their name forward. And that's a Republican, that's a Democrat, that's an independent. Naturally, in terms of what I'm interested in, as a voter in this very limited election, is to make sure that this individual is qualified, that they're capable of serving the needs of the people of District 2 for about, 7-9 months. I will be asking questions about where they stand on issues that are important to me. And I think that everyone in this room knows that homelessness is a priority for me. Infrastructure is a priority for me. Making sure our budget stays balanced is a priority, and minimum wage will be a priority. So those are questions I'll ask during the public hearing, and that will largely inform this council member's vote. How other council members choose to weigh in, I don't know, but it's going to take 5 of us to agree on a candidate, and we'll have that person seated sometime in early April.
Where do you live, Gene? Do you live in the district?
You got some time on your hands, Gene? The Honorable Gene Cubison. What do you think, guys? Anybody? Anybody? You can move. I don't think you can. I don't think they make the residential
Do you
requirement.
intend to give any guidance to your Democratic colleagues there? Is there a thought that a veto-proof majority would be a useful thing? Tendency is,
I understand what you're trying to do, Gene, but we're not trying to have conflict. We did that in 2013, and nothing really worked out great. I want to work with our new mayor and with our council to get a bunch of stuff done. And that means, listen, we saw when the legislative branch and the executive branch don't work well together, nothing gets done. That's not what we're looking to do. And so we'll have areas of disagreement. I think minimum wage will probably be one. But again, I hold out hope. There'll be other areas. But with regard to the appointment, we really just need a solid player to come in here and do good work for a short amount of time. And I think I know a thing or two about that, so I'll be evaluating accordingly.
Returning to medical marijuana,
Yeah.
you mentioned that there would be a couple in most of the council districts.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any council districts which, under the current plan, would not have any at all?
I believe mine is one. The council, when it took up this item last year, amended the previous mayor's suggestion to include the 100-foot buffer from any residential area. Much like with the food truck issue we were discussing before, most of my council district is mixed use, meaning to say that they're residential and commercial uses adjacent to one another. But when you look at the map, if you are someone who is in need of medical marijuana and you live in Normal Heights, you can go down Texas Street to Mission Valley and probably be able to access something, or down the 15 to Grantville, maybe just east from Mission Hills into Loma Portal. I think there'll be opportunities that are relatively close by.
Any other council districts in the same boat?
I don't know. Katie, do you have off the top of your head if there's any others that have 0? Under this, the map that we have is not an exact science, and I'm going to need your help with some of that, because what we did is we went to Sandag, we asked them to use their really cool GIS system and look at it and take their best guess. And as I was sort of alluding to before, on the opposite end of things, where some may look at this and say, oh, there's 80 that are allowed in this particular council district. But the reality is when you sort of overlay the adjacent uses, you're going to find that it's far fewer than that. When that map comes back and says I have none, I think that's probably true actually, but one never knows. And under the previous ordinance, we had some carve-outs for PDOs and other things like that. That remains to be seen what the council may ultimately end up adopting. But at the end of the day, if we end up about 30 in the city, I think that may be more than we have Walmart's, Targets, and Kmart's combined, and that's probably enough for now.
On the food trucks, the committee yesterday passed it forward without recommendation.
Yeah.
There were some suggestions of fine-tuning
Mhm.
of many of the provisions. Are you on board with that, or do you want it passed as is?
I'm supportive of the ordinance as is. I'm open to amendments. The rule around here says you got to get 5 folks to agree. I think that we would be better served to have something on the books rather than what we have now. And so if it takes amending it to get that done, we can do that. I think what we've put forward is a very sensible approach. Others may have good ideas or other approaches that are better. And I've never shied away from adopting a good idea, so we'll see.
So back to the pursuit of your agenda
Mhm.
as you laid out in the State of the City. You say, I'm a little unclear, you say you want to work with the new administration.
Yeah.
But if you get 6 Democratic votes and all caveats about, Democrats don't always vote alike, you may not get 6 votes on every piece of your agenda. But
Yeah.
let's just say the Democrats are in lockstep. Are you concerned about what this election may have said? I imagine folks on the new mayor's side will say, "Oh, look at the will of the voters," and here you are plowing ahead with a progressive agenda. Are you concerned about that perception at all?
I haven't given a great deal of thought to it, but we received largely positive response to my State of the City address from even people I wouldn't have expected. A lot of folks in the business community have told me they get it. They understand that we need to look at minimum wage. I've had folks in the business community, even the building industry, say, "You know what? You're right. Climate change is pretty important, and we're going to have to, lean in on this." So I don't believe that we're going to be such a zero-sum game between the new mayor and the council on this issue. I think there are areas of overlap. Part of my job is to try and build that consensus. But from a principled approach, when it comes down to it, my beliefs don't really change depending on who's in what office. I came here to do hopefully good work, and on the issues I laid out in the State of the City, these are issues I feel very personally about. I think the political realities of that speech, one where I'm there temporarily, so I was free to say whatever I wanted, and what I tried to lay out was what I think it's going to take to make San Diego great, and that doesn't change after last Tuesday. I still feel that way, and I'm going to still work hard to make sure those things get done. I think all of you know I'm a pretty practical guy. If that means compromising on certain things to actually accomplish it, I'll do that. But at the end of the day, I think that we absolutely have to get aggressive on our infrastructure. It is the biggest single issue standing between this city and greatness. Climate change is critical. It's real. We're on the coast, and rising seas are going to be a real problem for us, and we have to lead on this. Homelessness, we cannot represent that we're America's finest city with 10,000 people sleeping outdoors, and we got to do better than that. 10,000 homeless people, about half of that is unsheltered. It's voice here. I just want to be clear. Yeah, I don't know what level that would get. And then on minimum wage, one of the things that in serving this role, having the opportunity to go to every corner of the city and look around, I see a real problem between folks who have and those who do not. And we have to have a growing middle class. If folks have other ideas on how to get this done, I'm all ears. But generally that involves something around reducing permit fees or extending maps or something like that, and which we've done, and yet we still have some of this inequality going on, and we got to do better. That's not going to change.
In a similar vein, we're moving into a whole new campaign season here with the June primary. And,
Yes.
Already, how do you keep the domestic tranquility on the council when there's going to be some pretty competitive races out there?
Well, I think we did pretty good during the mayor's race. I think we had 2 gentlemen run against each other. They sat next to each other and then go out and debate each other at lunch and come back and vote some more. We're all pros around here. We're all professionals. We're here to serve the public. We're going to be fine. I'm not concerned about that. I am anxious to see who we'll get on the council. But in the meantime, we're going to get a lot done. So between now and December, when the new council is seated, expect us to get a lot, be on the move. We're not going to waste time.
Did you see Carl DeMaio's commercial?
Who?
Carl DeMaio.
No, I didn't. What is it? Okay.
I forgot my question.
All right. We good?
Oh, I know. Logistically, on replacement of
Yeah.
of the council member for D2,
Mhm.
I know it's 30 days.
Yes.
when does that clock start? Does that clock start when Faulkner is inaugurated?
That's exactly right. So yeah, I appreciate the question because I want to make sure everyone knows when the new mayor is officially, when the council ratifies the election and seats the new mayor, that's when the District 2 seat becomes vacant. And at that point starts the 30-day clock. That's how we get to the early April timeframe for the selection of a new council member. The applications will be available shortly. We're working closely with the city clerk and the city attorney to make sure that's available and that process is clear. So we'll have that as soon as I can get it to you. And then we will have a public hearing. The individuals will be allowed to speak to the council, and then the council will vote. And we'll be there until we get 5 for a candidate.
And how long before that council member is seated?
It's my understanding to be almost immediately, if not immediately. So pretty quickly, yeah. We need a full complement of council members. I want it soon.
Any reason why inauguration won't be March 3rd at this point?
No, other than this, it's out of my control. The tentativeness of my answers to those questions is, our best information is March 3rd. If for whatever reason the registrar is not able to do all of his count in time, there also are some requirements that we have because it's ratified through a public meeting. We have a noticing, situation. So. I feel pretty confident about that date, but if for whatever reason the registrar, the secretary of state, whoever has to touch this thing before it comes to the council was to perhaps miss a date, that's the only thing. I feel reasonably confident we'll hit that date, but of course there's always something that may be out of my control.
7,000 votes to come.
Correct.
Until next week, they're not gonna finish until Wednesday. That's what they say.
So you're telling me I shouldn't start my vacation on the 4th, Carlos? Okay. Not yet. Can I get some of that Univision money to help go on vacation? No, that would be illegal. I would not do that.
So if you get 2 or 3 candidates qualify for the seat.
Yes.
Why don't you put them in a bowl and then nobody has to, and pick one and
That's awesome.
choose the winner?
I remember
as long
some-
as they're qualified.
I remember someone once suggesting we should choose the council president by a flip of a coin. That's not how we do stuff around here, Carlos. Anyone? Trivia the other day? You want to remember that one? Okay. All right, guys. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it. We'll see you next week.